There is a version of you that does not ask for permission. Not loudly, not rebelliously, not in some dramatic, defiant way, but quietly. He just doesn't check anymore. He doesn't check if this is acceptable. He doesn't check if this is liked. He doesn't check if this fits the image. He moves, and only after moving, he notices what happened. This is not confidence. Confidence still looks outside. It still asks, am I doing this right? The sacred human does not ask that, not because he knows he's right, but because he has stopped needing to be right in the eyes of others. This is where people misunderstand him. They think he is arrogant. They think he is careless. They think he has no morals. But look closely. He is not trying to prove anything. That's the difference. Most people are performing rightness. They are constantly adjusting their tone, their words, their behavior to stay aligned with something external. Society, family, morality, image. They don't live, they position. The sacred human has stepped out of positioning, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to notice something disturbing. That most of what he called himself was actually reaction. Reaction to praise, reaction to rejection, reaction to fear, reaction to expectation. So when he begins to stop reacting, something strange happens. He doesn't become powerful, he becomes uncertain. Because without reaction, there is no script, no automatic, this is what I should do. And that space, that empty, slow, unclear space, is where the unapologetic version begins. Not because he becomes bold, but because he has nothing left to defend. Think about apology for a moment. Apology is not just saying sorry. Apology is a posture, a constant, invisible posture. I hope this is okay. I didn't mean to upset. I'm just trying my best. I'm not like that. Even when you don't say it, you carry it. In your tone, in your hesitation, in your edits. You soften yourself before the world can reject you. And again, this is not weakness, this is intelligence. You learned this, you adapted, you survived through alignment. But somewhere in that process, you started apologizing for things that were never wrong. Your silence, your intensity, your disinterest, your honesty, your difference. And slowly, you stop knowing what is actually yours. The sacred human begins when this confusion becomes visible. When you realize, I don't even know if I'm choosing or just adjusting. And that realization is not empowering, it's destabilizing. Because now, you can't fully trust your own behavior. So you slow down, not by strategy, but because you have to. You pause before speaking. You hesitate before agreeing. You notice your impulses. And in that slowing, you begin to see something clearly. That most of your actions were not coming from you. They were coming from a need to maintain something. Approval, image, belonging, control. So when that need weakens, your behavior changes, not dramatically, subtly. You start saying less, not to impress, but because you have nothing to add. You stop explaining yourself, not to appear mysterious, but because you don't feel the urge to justify. You say no without preparing a speech. You leave without overthinking the exit. You express without rehearsing the reaction. And from the outside, this looks like confidence. But inside, it feels like neutrality. You're not trying to dominate. You're not trying to stand out. You're not trying to be different. You're just not interfering with yourself anymore. And this is what makes the sacred human unapologetic. Not ego, not rebellion, absence of unnecessary correction. He is not constantly editing himself to fit a moving target, because he has seen something clearly, that the target never stabilizes. No matter how right you are, someone will disagree. No matter how kind you are, someone will misunderstand. No matter how perfect you try to be, something will still feel off. So he stops chasing alignment, not because alignment is bad, but because it is endless. An endless adjustment creates a fragmented self. So instead, he allows friction, not conflict with others, friction within himself. He lets a thought stay without polishing it. He lets an emotion exist without suppressing it. He lets a decision land without immediately correcting it. And in that friction, something solid begins to form. Not identity, presence. He becomes someone who can stay with himself. And from that, actions begin to come. Not optimized, not approved, not guaranteed, but real. This is where many people get uncomfortable, because the unapologetic man cannot be easily predicted. He might agree, he might not, he might stay, he might leave, he might speak, he might remain silent. Not based on a fixed identity, but based on what is actually happening. And that fluidity is often mistaken for inconsistency. But it's not inconsistency. It's responsiveness without fear. He is not trying to be stable in your eyes. He is trying to be honest in his own experience. And honesty is not always stable. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's sharp. Sometimes it's detached. Sometimes it's intense.
But it is not managed for comfort. This doesn't make him superior. In fact, it removes the need to be superior, because superiority is another form of positioning. I am better. I am wiser. I am more aware. The sacred human drops that too. Because the moment you claim a position, you start defending it. And defense brings back the same old cycle. So he doesn't try to be above. He doesn't try to be below. He just stops measuring himself through that scale. And when that happens, something surprising occurs. He becomes easier. Not easier to control, but easier to be with. Because there is no hidden agenda, no constant need to impress, no silent demand to be understood. He doesn't need you to validate him. He doesn't need you to agree. He doesn't even need you to see him correctly. Because he is not building himself through your perception anymore. He exists, whether you recognize it or not. That's what makes him unapologetic. Not loudness, not defiance, independence from constant interpretation. And yet, he still lives in the same world, same system, same people, same expectations. Nothing external has disappeared, but something internal has shifted. He is no longer entering life as a version to be maintained. He enters as a presence to be experienced. And that changes everything. Because now, he doesn't need to protect an image, so he can risk being misunderstood. He doesn't need to maintain approval, so he can risk being disliked. He doesn't need to prove himself, so he can risk doing nothing. And in those risks, he finds something unexpected. Space. Space to think. Space to feel. Space to choose. Not quickly, not
perfectly, but honestly. And that honesty, that raw, unfiltered alignment with himself, is what defines the sacred human. He is not perfect. He is not enlightened. He is not beyond struggle. He still feels doubt, still feels confusion, still feels fear. But he doesn't organize his life to hide those things. He lets them exist without turning them into identity. And that's the final shift. He is no longer trying to become something. He is simply not interrupting what he is. No apology, no performance, no unnecessary correction. Just a human who has stopped asking for permission to exist as he is. And that is the sacred human. And that is the sacred human.